EA's worst kept secret has been confirmed. Mass Effect Legendary Edition, a remaster of the original trilogy. Will this be worth it, or should we expect something a bit more typical of EA? That being something lazy. Hi, Estelden here. For those who don't know, Mass Effect Legendary Collection is just a remaster of the trilogy. You get all of the games with the DLC, and I'd say that those being in there is what gives this some actual value, given that some of them are quite good. That being said, the fact that this collection has a lot of hype behind it is really quite telling. In an ideal world, this would be seen as just a cash grab while we wait for the next grand entry in the Mass Effect universe. Not the case though, because this IP, it pretty much feels dead and like this is the last hurrah, so EA can just try and make the most of the fans that remain and milk some money out of them. If I'm being honest, I've never been massive on remasters, so I really just prefer to play on PC, and so when I see console players with titles like Skyrim Legendary Edition, which is just the same game with a bell and a whistle attached, I mean, that just looks really scummy. What's actually legendary about it? Are they referring to the game or the executive who came up with the idea to just keep selling the same game over and over? Because that guy, he must be generating the most revenue for a company while offering the least amount of value possibly ever in any industry. In the case of Mass Effect though, I can understand why some people might be more keen. We heard a month or so ago that the development team was having a bit of trouble because the team at EA was just not able to figure out how to streamline Mass Effect 1 and make it a bit more like the other two games in the series. I would imagine that these difficulties actually might not have been solved, and that's the reason we've gotten a spring 2021 release date instead of just, an actual release date. So it's possible they just haven't quite nailed how the first game is going to play. I just get the feeling that this was shown off before it was actually ready, because if you take a look, N7 Day, the big Mass Effect celebration, and I didn't even know what that day was, and then I took a look and I thought, oh yeah, November 7th, that actually makes sense. So that's all it really is. Normally though, it's a big day for Mass Effect, and let's face it, with the way EA, BioWare have treated the franchise as a whole, there's not been much to celebrate in recent times, so they wanted something to show off, and the Legendary Edition was what they decided to go with. I don't think it was actually ready to go, because the trailer, it was really bare bones. It basically just showed you like the basic characters in the trilogy. There was no gameplay, there was nothing to suggest that what they've been advertising is actually going to happen. They talk about improved resolutions, frame rates, textures, just the basic remaster stuff. In my opinion, especially as we move into this generation of consoles with like PS5, Xbox Series X, and I'd gotten the impression we were past the days of where we put together 10-year-old games into a little package, put it on the shelf for full price, and then there you go. I thought they'd run out of games to do it with, but Mass Effect seems to be the absolute last hurrah, the last stand for EA, where they can just milk their millions without having to put any work into a new game. Andromeda, of course, absolute disaster, pretty much killed the franchise, nearly killed BioWare, I would say, because we got Anthem as a follow-up from one of their other teams, and now they're pretty much on thin ice, I would say. So this trilogy, this is the only thing keeping fans hyped, and they're excited for this, because they probably know at this point that Mass Effect doesn't have much of a future, at least not in the short term. This is the best that they're going to get. So I'd say at the very least, BioWare, EA, they need to get this right. I mean, I don't even know if BioWare's involved. They probably farmed it out to, who knows, an overseas studio or something to get it out the door. So all the talk about Mass Effect 1 needing a lot of revision to bring it up to the same standard is something that I think the RPG fans of the series might be a little bit concerned about. I think most people, at the end of the day, probably consider Mass Effect 3 to be the real miss, mostly on the story front. The fact that a lot of the promises of the trilogy, Mass Effect 1, Mass Effect 2, all these choices that you make in that game, that really don't amount to much at the end of the day. Something that I really just wasn't a fan of over the course of the trilogy was that you would make a big choice with a character, whether it's like Rex, someone else, and what would happen is if one of the choices there is associated with Rex dying, then if you make the choice to let him live, and he follows you along, he continues on in your story, in your adventure, you're barely going to see him from that point on. He's alive, he's there, you're just not really going to see him at all. And the reason for that is BioWare couldn't really afford to put a ton of design time into all these different choices. So they made a decision, alright, if Rex could die here, then we're going to focus on other characters for the rest of the series. And for me, it just left a bit of a sour taste, because I feel like the character lineup got worse as the series progressed. By the time we got to Mass Effect 3, I thought, these characters, they're not really as good as the ones that I really enjoyed back in Mass Effect 1. So the whole trilogy idea, I think it was a slight bit of a miss. I don't know, honestly, if that's like a hot take, if a lot of people love the idea of the trilogy all kind of connecting with each other, but I feel that the real strength of Mass Effect was just the characters that they created originally. I don't think they needed a big selling point gimmick for how the whole trilogy it connects with each other, because the space opera RPG series and it's AAA, it's got that big budget, I think that is enough to sell people on its own. There's not a lot of games out there like that, especially in the RPG space. So when it comes to Andromeda, it was even more of a disappointment because they couldn't even give us that. They couldn't give us just that standalone great adventure with great characters. They gave us a bare bones open world, it sucked, and we were left with something that just felt like the series had nowhere to go. And then we're just left with this remaster. So EA, let's be honest, they're going to do the bare minimum. We're going to get our texture updates, there'll be a resolution update. There you go, $60 on the shelf. Thank you very much. And it's just disappointing that they couldn't even bring some new content to the table, because there's some Mass Effect fans who haven't got anything new since like 2012. I think that's when Mass Effect 3 came out, somewhere around then, and they've been left in the dust. Nothing of quality, Andromeda, the Mass Effect 3 ending, all these sour tastes. The very least EA could have done is thrown in maybe a brand new little campaign, something of the same kind of length as some of the DLCs that are in there as well. I don't think that would have been too much to ask. But instead their main problem has instead been getting Mass Effect 1 to a standard that was acceptable to new players. So their big focus here, it's not a love letter to the original fans of the series, which it really should be at this point. Instead the focus is on the new player experience. And look, it's fine to have a balance of both. I understand that the first game is clunky to some people. I know it can be a bit contentious there. Some people do feel that the shooting mechanics, they're just not even close to Mass Effect 2 and 3. But I didn't mind them because I felt the RPG focus was more so there. And I do think that if a new player comes along and they know this is an RPG series, I don't think it's going to be the end of the world to them that some of the shooting has that RPG element, like Fallout New Vegas, for example. I don't think the original Mass Effect game has the depth in terms of gameplay of Fallout New Vegas, but at least it's trying to do something kind of similar. So I hope EA doesn't go and taint that for the original fans and make it almost unplayable, make you feel like you've got to go back to that original to get that same experience. Because this has been advertised, it's kind of been shown and hyped up as being the original trilogy with a few extras thrown in, and it should at least be that. It should not be worse than that and make original fans feel like it was a complete waste of time, because that would be the ultimate insult. So where does Mass Effect go from here? Because BioWare are just trying to hang on at this point. They're trying not to get closed down and being another victim of EA studio closures. So they're going to be focused on trying to make a good game for once with Dragon Age 4. And in the meantime, Mass Effect as an IP is probably going to be gathering dust unless EA outsources it. I'm not sure what they'll do. I don't think they really have a studio with any RPG experience. They could look to Respawn Entertainment, I suppose. They could try their hand at an RPG or something similar. Maybe they'll do an action game in the Mass Effect universe. That could be an option. Maybe they'll buy another studio, try and put some of those IPs to work and make something happen. But that's really all I could see them doing. And it would be a shame if this collection sold really well and then EA took their money and ran, because this IP, it used to be such a hot property. I go back to 2007, 2008, when PlayStation were absolutely desperate to get this IP on their console, because it was the biggest thing at the time. And since then, it's really just gone downhill. So hopefully, this can be the start of something new. I really don't care about a remaster. I can just play the originals on PC if I want to. This isn't going to do a whole lot for me. I really don't want to pay full price for a few upgraded textures. I really don't care. But if it can be a kickstart for the IP to take off again, for there to be new Mass Effects, maybe from other studios, maybe not BioWare, Jesus Christ, they're really past it, but maybe a new player can come in and do something with this franchise. Let's see what happens. I'm probably expecting a June release for this, just based on the fact that I do think that Mass Effect 1 side of this is still in trouble, and they're probably still doing some work on it to make sure it works in this collection. So I'll wait and see, but I'm expecting June. And lastly, on the subject of Dragon Age 4, my gut feeling is still that EA and BioWare, they're going to try and come together and do some sort of live service. It's going to be a sword and sorcery, of course. That's what Dragon Age is. But I do think that they're going to go for that whole multiplayer element. Obviously, Anthem, complete failure. This will be a bit different because I do believe they'll focus on the content first rather than spending 5-6+ years on a flying system and not really anything else. So, Dragon Age 4, their absolute last chance chance. If they screw it up, I would say that's absolutely the end of Dragon Age, possibly the end of Mass Effect as well, unless EA goes with someone new for those IPs, and sometimes fresh blood can do wonders, unless it's Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2. Hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please comment, like, and subscribe. I'll see you on the next one. Thanks very much, and bye-bye.